The podcast in front of you rattles unsettlingly. Something skitters inside. The label shifts into view. Warning: adult content.
PseudoPod, episode 926 for June 28th, 2024. Beachhead by Daniel Lamole. Narrated by Trendane Sparks. Hosted by Kat Day. Audio production by Chelsea Davis. Hey everyone, hope you're all doing okay. I'm Kat, assistant editor at PseudoPod, your host for this week. Although I wasn't meant to be. I've stepped in because Scott couldn't make it. Take care, Scott. So, I'm excited to tell you that for this week we have Beachhead by Daniel Lamole. Now, Scott sent me his notes and he had a comment here about snickering. But obviously I'm a polite English lady, so I have no idea what that was about. Anyway, just in case you were getting your hopes up, it's not that sort of head. This is a horror story and it is horrific and deeply uncomfortable, and it also references drug abuse and contains some problematic language. Fair warning. Still with me? Okay, this story first appeared in the Canadian sci-fi horror magazine On Spec in 2008 and in the Best Horror of the Year Volume 1, wow, in 2009. Daniel Lamole is a Winnipeg-based writer whose work has appeared previously in the pages of On Spec, Apex Science Fiction and Horror Digest, and Ellen Datlow's Best Horror of the Year. He currently can be found wandering the Great White North as a photographer, writer, communications officer for Manitoba Hydro, and when life isn't too horrific, he still writes horror. Born in Texas when unleaded gas was fancy and still under 25 cents per gallon, Trendane Sparks eventually wound up in California, where he crawled through fiberglass insulation to run Cat5 cable, did tech support for Netcom, had several jobs on a PBS children's show, worked as a freelance mascot performer, and did video game Q&A. Then he became a voice actor, and life became fun again. Now you can hear his voice in games, animations, and audiobooks. Most commonly, he narrates Catalyst Game Labs in the Battletech and Shadowrun franchises, as well as for the Drabblecast, Escape Pod, and PseudoPod. And now, we have a story for you. And we promise you, it's true.
Beachhead by Daniel Lamole. Are you still alive over there? Alvy's voice sounded weak, but it retained that bong-huffing tonality that had been his hallmark since he hit puberty. It grated on me almost as badly as the grains of sand coating my teeth. In my darkness, I could hear the sound of approaching water. "Come on, Jim," he continued. "If you can't talk, just open your eyes for me." I opened my eyes and was immediately blinded by daylight. When my vision adjusted, I found myself staring at a stretch of deserted beach. The seemingly decapitated heads of Alvy and Mikey Birdie lay before me, propped up in the sand. "What the fuck?" I croaked, as both of my crewmates blinked tiredly at me. "It's about time you woke up," Alvy said. "We've been deep-sixed." The ocean wind picked up suddenly, blowing more sand in my face. When I tried to raise my hands to shield my eyes, I found myself unable to move. I finally realized that my arms and legs were frozen in place, packed in sand that felt as heavy as concrete. Of course, I panicked. "Save your energy," Alvy said, after watching me struggle for a while. "They probably tied your hands too." "Don't fucking tell me," I groaned, feeling a sickness rising in my stomach. "Don't tell me it was Roddy." "Well, the good news is they've buried us too far from the water," Alvy said. "The tide already came and went. Fucking idiots." The "they" that Alvy was referring to was likely our former trawler crew. For the better part of 3 years, we'd been running drugs, guns, and assorted unmarked parcels for Colin Roddy. It paid well, but Roddy was taking the lion's share with little contribution on his part. I was sick of it, and Alvy was too. We'd purchased our own cigarette boat less than 4 months prior, and had only used it for 2 freelance runs up the coast. Just a bit of cash on the side while we kept up appearances with Roddy. Neither run was a major haul, but somebody had obviously tipped him off. My first suspect would have been Mikey Birdie. He was Roddy's chief enforcer, a vicious prick who kept people looking the other way. He also policed the crew, in case anyone got too greedy or turned fed. But there was only one problem with that theory. Birdie was buried up to his neck less than 5 feet away from me. "Mikey," I began, choosing my words carefully, "do you have any idea what this is all about?" "Quite a few," Mikey said, pausing to spit sand out of his mouth. "You two are either feeding the cops, or you decided to become greedy fuckers. All the same to me. You're as good as dead." "Fuck you, Mikey," Alvy snapped. "Then what are you doing here, huh? Please tell us." "Roddy's made a major mistake," Mikey fumed, closing his eyes to another gust of wind. "He may as well have cut off his right hand." "Well, it looks like you weren't all that indispensable," Alvy said. I felt an overwhelming urge to laugh. Given our circumstances, Alvy and Mikey's tough posturing seemed ridiculous. They looked like a pair of obscene lawn ornaments. "Let it go, Alvy," I interrupted. "Let's concentrate on getting out of here." "We're not getting out on our own," Alvy said, looking more downcast. "I don't know about you, but I can't even feel my arms and legs anymore." There were still sharp pains in my arms, but my legs could have been miles away. A friend of mine had once lain on his arm for an entire day in a heroin-induced stupor. He lost use of the limb entirely. Taking the moral of that story to heart, I made a mental note to try and flex my arm and leg muscles at regular intervals. "Do you know where we are?" I said, scanning as much of the shoreline as I could. My forced line of sight only let me look in one direction down the beach. The other half of the shore lay hidden behind my head. The beach curved sharply toward the ocean, ending in a rocky point about a mile ahead. Further inland, the white sand gave way to rocks, scrub brush, and a wall of tall grass. "Were either of you awake when they dumped us here?" "Nope. They must have put us under with something heavy-duty," Alvy said. He was buried facing me, enabling him to view the other half of the shoreline. Mikey was buried slightly farther inland, facing the ocean. "The sand doesn't look anything like the mainland. It's too fine. Could be one of the carrier islands, maybe."
"Wherever it is, it's off the main drags,"
Mikey Birdie said, barely audible over the waves.
"I've been watching the water since I woke up, and I haven't seen one boat."
I tried to recall my last waking memory. Alvy, Mikey, Thornton, Swain, and I were readying Roddy's trawler, the Angel Cake, for a midnight run up the coast. The cargo was a few boxes of pills, nothing huge. So when Roddy showed up right before our launch, I was immediately suspicious. But with Mikey and Thornton on board for security, there was no chance of an easy exit. I tried to stay on my toes during the run, but got distracted when Alvy came out of the hold with a large hypodermic needle sticking out of his neck. Before I could even react, Thornton's fist hit me in the temple. I was out before I hit the deck. As the sun climbed in the sky, we kept quiet. I was beyond thirsty and didn't want to waste a breath until I saw a boat. Then I would scream louder than ever. For a few hours, Alvy occasionally hollered, hoping to catch the attention of someone further inland. Every time he shouted, the entire situation seemed increasingly hopeless. With the roar of the water and the wind high, we were quickly out of earshot. Someone would have to trip over our heads to actually find us. Meanwhile, Mikey appeared to be resting his eyes or asleep. He was another worry. A shark's head is still capable of biting you, even after it's severed from the body. I half expected Mikey's ugly lid to roll across the sand and tear into me with its teeth. If Mikey found a way out before we did, Alvy and I were both in trouble. And then there was another part of me that was actually afraid of being found, afraid of seeing Roddy, Thornton, and Swain walking across that beach, ready to finish the job. There was no point in getting emotional about it. We were fucked. The sun had reached its full height, heating the sand to a torturous temperature. I felt the skin on my nose and forehead slowly burn and tasted nothing but sand on my tongue. Several death scenarios ran through my head. Dehydration, blood clots, exposure during the night, or perhaps a drowning death after all, at the peak of a midsummer storm. "Jim," Alvy finally said as he surveyed his half of the beach, "I don't believe it. Here! Over here!" Mike Birdie broke from his sleep, his eyes widening immediately. Although I couldn't see what had grabbed their attention, I saw hope in their eyes. "Alvy," I said, "someone's here?" Yes, walking up the beach. Hey! Mike Birdie and I both joined in with Alvy, screaming our lungs out with joy. "It's okay," Alvy said. "He's coming. He's seen us." At last, a long shadow drifted over the sand, covering my head in its cooling shade. "My God, buddy, you have no idea how glad we are to see you," Alvy said, close to tears. To my surprise, our rescuer stepped right over my head, a hairless set of legs in worn-out running shoes. It turned out that our stranger was no more than a boy, probably not even a teenager yet. His skin was baked brown from the sun, partially covered by a red bathing suit and a ratty old t-shirt. A mop of tangled brown hair obscured the top third of his face. "Can you dig us out, little man?" I asked the boy. "Someone's played a nasty joke and left us out here."
"Dig me out first,"
Mikey suddenly jumped in.
"My friends have sunstroke. I can help you dig faster."
"Don't listen to him, kid. He's delirious," I snapped back. "Why don't you get one of us out? He needs medical attention." "Christ, you guys be quiet," Alvy intervened before trying a different tack. My name's Alvy Fullerton. This is Jim Leach and Mike Birdie. What's your name?" The boy didn't answer. He hovered over Alvy, staring down at him intently. "Maybe he's French or something," I said. "Okay, please, kid, listen to me," Alvy said, ready to break down after an uncomfortable minute of silence. "We're close to dying here. Dig us out." The boy knelt in front of Alvy and picked up a handful of sand. Opening his fingers wide, he let the grains blow away in the ocean wind. Mike Birdie had reached his limits.
"Are you fucking retarded?"
he yelled, gnashing his teeth.
"Stop fucking around and get me out of here, now!"
The boy stood again, this time towering over Mikey's head. If the kid was scared or angry, I certainly couldn't tell. He was tough to read.
"I know you understand me, so I'll say this once,"
Mikey said, narrowing his eyes.
"Use your hands. Grab a stick or something. I don't care. Just know that if you don't start digging, I'm going to find you when I get out. I'll kill your family, and then I'll kill you. Very slowly."
Alvy and I were both dumbstruck by Mikey's stupidity. The boy casually walked away from us, disappearing in the tall grass behind the beach. "Mikey, you fucking idiot!" Alvy shrieked with an anger I'd never seen before. "If you've scared that kid up, hey, come back! We've got money! Hey!" While Mikey boiled in his own blood, Alvy and I desperately scanned the scrub brush, searching for the boy. We continued to call out for help, hoping to coax the boy back to us, but to no avail. Alvy lost it. "I don't blame him for taking off," he cried. "He's probably never seen such a bunch of rat-fucking scumbags in his whole life." "Alvy, relax." Further down the beach, I could see the boy emerging from the brush. "He's coming back. It looks like he's carrying something."
"It had better be a shovel or a shovel-shaped stick," Mikey exploded, "or I'll snap that kid's neck right on this fucking beach."
No, it looks like golf clubs." Mikey was still breathing, but in shallow gasps that were becoming less frequent. His head was an island surrounded by a shallow pool of his own blood. Every once in a while, he would let another one of his teeth dribble down his misshapen jaw. "Is he still here?" Alvy blurted, twisting his head several times in either direction. He seemed to be in deep shock, even though the boy hadn't laid a finger on either of us. I hated Mikey Birdie. I'd seen him kill close to a dozen people, and had spent the last few months worrying that I would be next. But Alvy and I had both begged for Mikey's life when a 12-year-old kid beat him to a living pulp. Through the entire ordeal, not a glimmer of emotion crossed the boy's face. When the deed was finished, he tossed the rusty golf clubs into the ocean and slid back into the cover of the tall grass. I think he's gone away for a while, I whispered as the sun disappeared from view. Mikey Birdie wasn't breathing anymore. Whereas the sun was unbearably hot during the day, night on the beach was 100 times worse. A deep chill entered every cell of my body, even before the wind grew stronger. I was so drained that I could have closed my eyes and never woken up. But Alvy and I both kept our eyes open, waiting for Mikey's young killer to return. Hours passed without incident. It appeared more and more likely that the beach would take us after all. "I have to shut my eyes, Jim," Alvy said, speaking for the first time in hours. "I just can't stay awake anymore." "Go on, then. I'll let you know if I see him," I said. Over the water, a full moon lit up a cloudless sky, a perfect evening for a midnight sail. I stared at Alvy as he fell immediately into a deep sleep. I can't say I ever felt guilty very much in my life. But there it was, adding to every miserable second.
"You're smart boys,"
my dad told Alvy and me once.
"but you're rotten to the core. You can have all the brains in the world, but if you don't got a heart, you may as well be stupid."
My dad was only half right. Alvy was a good person. His only mistake was following me around for most of his life. I'd finally gone and pulled him into the toilet with me. All we had left to do was to wait for someone to flush. "I'm sorry, Alvy," I said as loud as I could manage. If Alvy heard me, he didn't answer back. In what may have been several hours later, I woke to the thud of footsteps in the sand. All I could do was react in the same way I would to a noise under my bed. I kept my eyes closed and tried to pass off the sound as imagination. Then I felt a wet towel engulf my face. "No!" I yelped, snapping my head backward. I opened my eyes and found myself staring into the face of a wide-eyed, runny-nosed little girl. She was wrapped in several beach towels, probably to insulate against the wind. My reaction had startled her. "Don't go away, please," I rasped as she took several steps back. "I need help." My dehydrated voice cut out completely after that. I tried to speak, but no sound would come. To my relief, the girl came back to me. After all, I was only a foot tall and hardly much of a threat. I watched the girl as she fumbled inside a small plastic cooler. She was probably only 7 or so. A dark bob of hair topped her dirt-smeared face, while her legs were covered in scabs, the typical battle scars of summer. The girl cleaned away the dried blood from my face with a damp towel before bottle-feeding me with a can of warm orange soda. As I guzzled the soda, I noticed she had already covered Mikey's head with a beach bag. Once I had completely drained the can, I pointed toward Alvy with my lips. "Could you see if my friend's all right? You'll have to dig him out first. He's really sick." The girl was padding toward Alvy when a noise distracted her. It had come from further down the beach. In the moon's luminescence, I saw a familiar tangle of hair and gangly legs. She saw him too. Her sarong of beach towels dropped to the sand. The boy had started to run. "Get out of here!" I barked at the girl. "Run and get help! Now!" The girl didn't need to be told twice. She sped off toward the cover of the brush, kicking sand as she ran. Within seconds, the boy ran past me as well, silent except for a few measured breaths. "Keep your fucking hands off her!" I screamed. "I'm back here! I'm right here, you sick little fuck!" But neither the boy nor the girl came back. I raged and struggled in my shallow grave, still unable to break free. The next time I woke up, I felt the heat of sunlight on my face. But the sun was screaming. I opened my eyes and was nearly blinded by a bright ball of fire. It was as though the sun had dropped from the sky and landed on the beach in front of me. But it was night, and the screams were coming from Alvy. His head was rocking back and forth in a blanket of flames, his skin already blistered black and hissing. A short distance behind Alvy, I saw the boy, illuminated by the fire. A small jerry can dangled from his fingers. "No!" I tried to scream, but all that came out was a dry whisper. My lips continued moving in a silent, incoherent fit of obscenities. As Alvy slowly died, I was overcome by the smoke and the stench of burning flesh. The boy stood and watched for some time. In the flickering light, I could detect his faint look of boredom, before that hateful face disappeared in a wall of black smoke. I wasn't sure how long I had passed out for, but when I awoke, the first signs of dawn were in the sky. I realized that I was facing heavenward. Half of the sand had been pulled away from my living grave, and my hands were untied. To my right lay the girl, exhausted and clutching the hull of a broken toy boat. As soon as she noticed I was awake, the girl ran out of the small crater. In seconds, she returned with her tiny cooler, crammed full of juice cans and battered sandwiches. I wasn't able to eat the food, but swallowed the drink she offered me. After a third can of pineapple juice, most of what I drank came right back up again. Despite the desperate look on the girl's face, we had to wait. She was in for a disappointment if she was expecting me to finish the digging. I was incredibly weak and barely able to push the sand away from my legs. Using the toy as a makeshift shovel, the girl resumed digging until I was free. Then all I could do was fumble on the sand, trying to coax the feeling back into my limbs. If our 12-year-old sadist decided to return, I wouldn't have been able to defend either of us. I tried to drink and eat a little more as the girl and I stared out at the ocean. The sky above was overcast, but it glowed with a sickly yellow hue. Storm weather. "Can you talk?" I eventually asked her. "Did he hurt you?" I knew absolutely nothing about children. The girl could have been in shock or was simply unable to speak at all. The waves started to pick up, and she became agitated again, scanning the beach and the higher ground. When we finally locked eyes, I understood her immediately. Let's move. Before we left the burial site, I armed myself with the jagged neck of a broken beer bottle and covered Alvy's head with a towel. "I'll be back, Alvy," I told my oldest friend. "I won't leave you here." Even though I was exhausted, I felt almost high. Minutes later, death had seemed to be just around the corner. Now I had a fighting chance. I would have to go into hiding, without a doubt. Roddy had connections far and wide, and he wouldn't take kindly to me showing up alive somewhere. Rather than risk being spotted on the beach, we walked under the cover of the tall grass, sticking to a well-worn path that snaked through the foliage. I let the girl lead, trying to keep up as best I could. I was hesitant and worried about being surprised along the trail. Although the girl looked underfed, she had surprising energy, often running up the trail to make sure the coast was clear. When I lagged too far behind, she would run back to me and grab a firm hold of my index finger, pulling me up to speed. At one point, while the girl was far ahead of me, the brush became more tangled. I ended up veering off the path, taking an artery from the main trail. Before I knew it, I was back on the beach, the unmistakable hum of countless flies in the air. Closer to the water, there were 3 dark mounds, each obscured by a thick cloud of insects. I only recognized one of the corpses, all of them buried neck-deep in a far too familiar manner. Roddy was immediately identifiable by his tattoo, an octopus on his neck. A bow saw was embedded in the middle of his head, as though someone had given up halfway through the grisly task. The other bodies, I assumed, were Swain and Thornton. Blood was everywhere, and I was immediately sick. But I didn't say anything until I saw the wreck of the Angel Cake. The main fragment of the ship was embedded bow first in the sand, like a jet that had taken a nosedive. Smaller pieces of the wreck were strewn across the beach, including our illicit cargo. Red and white pills dotted the sand everywhere I looked. Whatever had happened to us, Roddy wasn't behind it, and I was getting the feeling that the competition wasn't involved either. There was no decent explanation for any of it. This isn't real, I told myself. But then I felt that small hand grabbing my pant leg. The girl's wide eyes pleaded to me once again, urging me to move onward. Back in the cover of the brush, we followed the trail up a steep incline. The grass and bushes started to give way to rocky terrain, with boulders the size of automobiles. Out of breath, I stopped and turned for a look back. From the higher vantage point, I saw that the coast was actually either the tail end of a narrow island or perhaps a long strip of peninsula. The grassy ridge ran like a spine down the landmass, dividing two strips of beach. I had been a sailor for 8 years along the east coast, and none of this looked remotely familiar. The girl's progress was slowed considerably as she crept around the larger stones. The wind was stronger here, whirling between the boulders. As we came to the last cropping of rocks, I heard distant wailing. At first, I thought it was gulls. The girl immediately crouched down in a crevice of rock, motioning me to follow suit. The sound, on second thought, was too low-pitched to be birds. "What is that?" I asked her, dropping to my knees. The girl put a filthy hand to my mouth. She was shaking and wouldn't move an inch further. She pointed toward the opening at the end of the crevice. I crawled forward on my hands and knees, still unsure of what I was hiding from. From this new vantage point, I could finally determine that we were on an island. The landscape declined sharply toward a rock-littered beach, much rougher terrain than where I had been imprisoned with Alvy and Mikey. The wailing had become much louder. I looked more intently and realized I was staring at a crop of hundreds of human heads. It was the hair that confirmed everything. Some of the people had longer locks that whipped in the ocean wind. Many of the prisoners kept their mouths open in a constant wail. The others were either sleeping or dead. "God," I exhaled, overwhelmed by the sight before me. Then I saw the boy. He was at the edge of the island, walking between the rows of heads. His hands grasped a broken oar, which he used to absent-mindedly whack across the odd person who was in his path. Behind him, the waves were starting to roll in with greater force, submerging some of the screaming faces. I climbed to my feet, then balled my fingers into 2 weak fists. Immediately, the girl grabbed my arms and pulled me back into hiding. Far down along the shoreline, the boy had taken to the air. At first, he floated several feet above the sand, discarding the broken oar and stretching his arms outward. As he climbed higher into the sky, seemingly invulnerable to the wind, the prisoner's moans grew louder. The waves became increasingly violent, and more of the prisoners disappeared underwater. The boy was far above us now, as though touching the clouds, but he didn't appear to have noticed us. Instead, he cast his eyes out to the ocean. There, almost lost in the rolling waves, was a fishing boat that was only slightly larger than the Angel Cake. It bobbed and spiraled in the water, drifting closer to a jag of half-submerged rock. "I can't look," I told the girl, but found myself unable to turn away. The boat's erratic course made it appear as though the entire crew were asleep, perhaps as the crew of the Angel Cake had been. Even if anyone on board had seen the rocks, they weren't able to stop the sickening collision that followed. The boy waited for the moment like a bird of prey. He rapidly descended on the surface of the water, where he retrieved a limp body in each hand. Meanwhile, the storm was fading almost as fast as it had begun. As the waves subsided, the wreckage of several different boats rose to the water's surface. Amidst the waterlogged boards, clothing, and luggage, I saw the intact spine of an overturned lifeboat. There wasn't much time. As the boy flew out for a second batch of victims, I scrambled down the rocky incline, pulling the girl's arm so hard I thought it would come off in my hand. Thankfully, she followed without much protest, dragging her plastic cooler by its broken handle. I heard many voices as we ran across the beach. Some begged, some threatened, some wailed in defeat. I ignored them all. With a minor struggle, I managed to upright the overturned lifeboat. Farther down the beach, the boy had already accumulated a considerable pile of human beings. Some of the fishermen crawled weakly across the sand. The window of opportunity was closing. I lost the girl for a moment. She was crouched behind the head of an elderly woman who was miraculously still alive. The girl was digging madly with her bare hands. She may have been small, but that girl put up quite a struggle when I pulled her toward the lifeboat. I purposely avoided all eye contact with the old woman. The guilt nearly came back for a moment, but like so many other times in my life, I turned it off in seconds, just like flipping a switch. "There's no time, kid," I told the girl, who still flailed as I flipped her into the lifeboat with her cooler. "I'm sorry." I pushed the boat until the water nearly reached my waist. As I pulled myself on board, I cast another glance down the beach. One of the fishermen was fighting back. After a brief struggle, the boy took to the air once again, grasping the fisherman by his neck. "Row," I told the girl as I removed one of the small oars from its clips and handed it to her. The boy was almost lost in the clouds before he dropped the fisherman to his death. I turned away before the body hit the beach and began to row as best I could. The water was glass now, a photograph of dead ocean. The effect was broken slightly by the wrecks accumulated along the rocks, several more fishing boats, and the barely submerged husk of a sizable yacht. Maybe the girl recognized one of the boats as her own. I paused briefly to properly mount both oars, and then took over the rowing entirely. I never took my eyes off the boy after that. He likely saw us as well, but I think he had greater atrocities to commit that day. Even after the island disappeared from view, he still burned brightly in my mind. We've been at sea for over a day now, moving where the current takes us. Micheline spoke this morning, long enough to tell me her name and pass along one other bit of information. "I'm hungry." I wish I could have helped her there. We should have taken more food. The little bit we did bring with us may have to last quite a while. Neither of us has spoken since then. We should conserve every ounce of energy. So instead, I think about the beach and try to decide exactly what I saw floating miles above the sand. But I won't get too philosophical about it. Angels, devils, police, criminals, they all have it in for me. But they're going to have to wait.
Well done. You've survived another story. What did you think of Beach Head by Daniel Lamole? If you're a Patreon subscriber, we encourage you to pop over to our Discord channel and tell us. The sense of claustrophobia is palpable at the beginning of this story. Is there anything more frightening than being trapped, fully conscious, and able to see, but not able to move? It's the stuff really bad dreams are made of. The kind of nightmares where you wake up and feel nothing but relief. Except, in this story, Jim isn't dreaming, he really is stuck in the burning sun. And worse still, he's stuck with a psychopath who'll do who knows what if he somehow manages to escape first. And just when Jim thinks help may have arrived, the help turns out to be even worse. The tension here ramps and ramps, and it doesn't let up. Lamole neatly skips across time rather than describe everything in a linear fashion, leaving our imaginations to fill in the gaps, before ramming some stuff of his own into those gaps as well. It's masterful horror writing. There are unanswered questions here, and that's okay. In horror in particular, we don't have to answer every question, tie up every loose end. Fear is very often born from the unknown. Once you look the monster in the eye, once you understand it, it often loses a lot of its power. This, of course, is why humans spend their lives trying to understand things, and why sometimes people start to make up their own versions of reality. Telling yourself you understand is incredibly comforting, even if the stories in your head revolve around the idea that everyone is out to get you. At least you know that, at least you're prepared. Or perhaps, in a world of terrifying unknowns, another way to cope is to turn to substances that allow us to block everything out. The sort of substances that Jim has been peddling in this story. At least everything is blocked out for a little while, until we wake up and realise the nightmare isn't just a nightmare. The fact is, sometimes we do get stuck in the sand. Sometimes we feel as though we can't move, as though there is no way out. We can't dig for ourselves. We need someone else. And it's only a matter of luck whether someone better finds us before something worse does. Jim is lucky here, or perhaps, for all his drug-dealing past, he redeems himself by not attempting bribery and by trying to warn the girl about the boy. Just enough to earn a sliver of a chance. We don't know. And we don't know if he makes it in the end, either. That's the way it goes. We tell you that all our stories are true, and the truest truth of all is that there's no way to see the future. All any of us can do is try to make the best choices we can and hope. Because sometimes we just have to wait. On to the subject of subscribing and support. PseudoPod is funded by you, our listeners, and we're now formally a non-profit. Subscriptions really make a difference to us. A small monthly Patreon donation gives us way more than just money. It gives us stability, reliability, dependability, and a well-maintained tower from which to operate. And trust us, you want that as much as we do. So, if you can, please go to pseudopod.org and sign up by clicking on Feed the Pod. If you have any questions about how to support EA and ways to give, please reach out to us at donations@escapeartists.net. If you can't afford to support us financially, then please consider leaving reviews for episodes or generally talking about them on whichever form of social media you can't bring yourself to stay away from this week. We have a Blue Sky account and we'd love to see you there. Find us at pseudopod.org. If you like merch, Escape Artists also has a Void merch store with a huge range of hoodies, t-shirts and other bits and pieces. The link is in various places, including our latest social media posts. Check it out. PseudoPod is part of the Escape Artists Foundation, a 501c3 non-profit, and this episode is distributed under the Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 International License. Download and listen to the episode on any device you like, but don't change it or sell it. Theme music is by permission of Anders Manga. Next week we have 3 Nights with the Angel of Death by Emily Ruth Verona, narrated by Kevin Hayes, and all brought to you by our host with the most, the wonderful Alastair Stewart. And finally, PseudoPod and G.K. Chesterton know. A dead thing can go with the stream, but only a living thing can go against it. See you soon, folks. Take care and never stop hoping.
An arm appeared from nowhere on the shape, seemingly projected like the pseudopod of a protozoan.
It's a pseudopod. It's a big foot.
It's all about podcasts these days.